Good morning, good afternoon. I guess it's just about 12:03 Eastern Time, and welcome to today's webinar, The Human Reality Rethinking HR During the Great Resignation. My name is Chris Tierney, and I am the Vice President of Human Resources and Learning at the Human Resources Professionals Association. I am here with Christine Serbu, who is Research Director from Leger. And we're joining the webinar today from our places all over. It's a remote webcast. So I'm joining from my home in Hamilton, Ontario. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge that the city of Hamilton is situated upon the traditional territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. The city of Hamilton is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and I'm grateful to be on this land joining today's webinar with all of you. And I'm grateful that all of you are able to join us today for this rescheduled broadcast, and we appreciate your flexibility to allow us to do that. And we're thrilled, Christine and I are thrilled that you're joining us today. So why are we here? Well, we've been talking a lot throughout the pandemic about the heightened risks associated with talent attraction, retention, and engagement. The term "the Great Resignation" has made its way into our everyday language in our workplaces, and it's highlighted as a key talent risk that emerged over the last 2 years and will impact our workplaces in the future. But do we have it right? Are we looking at these issues through the correct lens and with the right perspective? For example, before the pandemic, we were talking about the war for talent. We were developing our employer brands as a way to differentiate our organizations among the labor market. And we were focusing on retention strategies to ensure we increase the likelihood of retaining our top talent and most critical skills. So what's really changed? Are these talent and workforce challenges that much different from before? And if they are we looking at them in the right way so that we can effectively address them in today's world? And what about the humans before all of this? Are we doing the right things for them? The team at Leger wondered all of these same things. And so they determined to undertake a unique study. And we're here today to learn what they discovered. And I'm excited to get going and to hear from Christine in terms of what the study has revealed. So without any further delay, I'll pass it over to Christine, who's going to lead us through the study findings. Christine, over to you.
Thanks, Chris. As Chris mentioned, I'm Christine Serbu, Research Director with Leger, based in Edmonton, Alberta, located within Treaty 6 territory and within the Métis Homelands and Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 4. And I am very excited to be here with all of you today. We do have a full house, but we will try to leave still some time at the end for questions. And please feel free to enter them in the chat, in the question box throughout, and we'll try to answer as many at the end as we can. So on the agenda today is a four-part presentation. First, I'll touch very briefly on why we're here and what our research objective was before moving on to part two, where we'll take a look at some of the popular assumptions that we've been hearing about the Great Resignation and trends in the workplace. Towards the end, we'll take a look at employee personas, 5 employee types that we identified through a segmentation analysis. And then finally, we'll wrap it up with suggested next steps for employers and HR professionals. So all that said, let's get started. So why are we here? Well, there's a lot of information, a lot of reports, a lot of surveys, a lot of articles. We've seen them, you've seen them. They're all out there circulating about the Great Resignation. One of the things I've seen, is that hybrid work is improving work-life balance because we don't have to spend 1 to 2 hours a day commuting. But the thing is, and even in my own life, I see this kind of information published on a daily basis, and it's not resonating with me. It doesn't feel like this is my life, like this is what I'm experiencing. It's a very individual perspective too. So, ultimately, it's not black and white. And when we first conducted the study, what we wanted to determine was what employees wanted for themselves at work in a post-COVID workplace. What we didn't realize was that by including some questions about employees' personal lives and their personalities, that we would end up finding some really interesting trends in the data, trends that started to give just a little bit more of that eureka moment, because when you think about it, it all starts to make sense. So that's what we're here today to talk about. And when we say the human reality, to me, this means taking a deeper dive into how employees navigate the workforce and how work fits into their lives, our lives. Ultimately, the human reality is about taking an integrated and holistic approach to human relations, which we can only do when we recognize and admit that work and life are completely intertwined. So, my goal today is to encourage all of you to, at the very least, rethink how you relate to the employees you work with, the teams that you lead. I think there's significant potential for employers to improve attraction and retention with just a slightly more thoughtful approach. So, just a quick recap of the survey. It was conducted late last year, over 3,000 Canadians through our Leo web panel, and respondents were those who are currently employed or who are not employed but would be joining or planning to rejoin the workforce in the very near future. For example, it could have included someone who was laid off during COVID, or even recent graduates who might be entering the labor market after post-secondary. We targeted the survey to have national representation across Canada, so the results are weighted to age, gender, and province or territory. Okay, so that's why we're here. Now what we're going to do is start looking at 4 popular assumptions and present the data that made us just rethink these a little bit. First, we're going to take a look at the overall states of work and life. Looking at the life side of things, we have nearly 2/3 of Canadians who say they're satisfied with their quality of life and their personal relationships. That's not that great, but it's not terrible either. The majority agree that family and friends are the most important things to them, and that happiness is a better indicator of success than income. Nothing sounds surprising there. And then we look at the work side of things. 3/4 say that they're happy at work, and 3/4 also say they can maintain a work-life balance. That's pretty decent. So if people are generally happy at work, and for the most part don't have any complaints about their work-life balance, then what's up with 38% who told us that they're likely to look for a new work opportunity? What's up with the great resignation? The question we keep asking ourselves. We see it happening right in front of us, and most, if not all of us, have probably been impacted. We've seen it on our teams, we've maybe participated in it ourselves. I think it's a very real reality. And our take is that it ties back to that pesky item captured in the very first bullet, quality of life. And this is why I want to start changing the way that we think of work-life balance. Even on this slide, you can see we have work on the one side and life on the other. They're split from one another. That's how we talk about it. And when we say work-life balance, personally, I picture like a scale, and you have work on the one hand and life on the other. And maybe you have a really bad day at work, and that's down here. But if you're that happy with your home life, if things are just going wonderfully for you, that's up here. They kind of balance out. That's what I imagine. But that's not what it's like. When we have a bad day at work or a bad day at home, it spills into the other side of things. And we can't help it. We simply can't. And I think we all know that that's just the truth of it. So this reminds me of a new TV show. It's called Severance. It's on Apple TV. If you haven't seen it, I would highly recommend it. Fascinating premise, which I'll briefly recap, no spoilers. But essentially, people can undergo a procedure called severance in which their mind gets split into 2. So they do something to your brain, and when you go to work, you have no recollection of your home life. And when you finish the day at work, you are back in your home life, your personal life, with no recollection of your day at work. It's a completely separate life, the 2 selves. Interesting premise and very thought-provoking. Except in the first episode, we can see that the main character, he's struggling with some personal trauma. And to cope with it, he drinks a lot. Well, what happens when he goes to work? His mind has reset. He has no memory of this trauma, but the body remembers. He's hungover. He'll feel the effects of that hangover all day. And that's just one physical example. In real life, we can't make that emotional cut. So the emotional parts spill over too. We just truly can't leave one part of ourselves at the door. So this brings me to assumption one, that work-life balance is achievable. I don't know about you, but like I said, I personally struggle with the term because there are two parts to the self and we can't just pretend like they don't impact each other. So the story starts with an initial look at quality of life and mental health. And more specifically, what are the impacts on these two things when good and bad things happen to us at work? So if we start with some numbers, 63% of our respondents reported experiencing a positive event at work in the past year. This could include getting a promotion, feeling like they got recognition for doing a good job, having a conversation with their boss about their career goals. It's inclusion they wanted, didn't get a raise they deserved, etc. And then 51%, about half of our respondents, reported experiencing a negative health event at work. And by this, we mean mental or physical health. And this could mean experiencing burnout, feeling like they've got poor work-life balance, dealing with an illness or an injury, etc. Now, the first group, those who have experienced positive events at work, 69% are satisfied with their overall quality of life, and 61% are satisfied with their mental health. In the second group, the non-health negative events, 63% are satisfied with their overall quality of life, and 54% are satisfied with their mental health. So it's starting to drop a little bit. But then finally, when we look at the third group, those who experienced a negative health-related event, 61% were satisfied with their quality of life. That's a drop of 8 percentage points, a significant decrease. And then 49% were satisfied with their mental health. Overall mental health takes a big hit. And then, of course, it's also worth mentioning that those who were dissatisfied with their quality of life were more likely to report looking for a new work opportunity. So here we're showing a glimpse of the results that we gathered when doing a key driver analysis. We looked at two things, the drivers or the biggest factors behind overall quality of life and the drivers of job satisfaction. When it came to quality of life, mental health and personal relationships were the top drivers for all ages. They account for about half of one's quality of life score. And when we look at job satisfaction, well, overall, there were a few drivers that had relatively equal importance. Relationship with one's supervisor, applying their knowledge and skills on the job, getting recognition, and maintaining work-life balance. But interestingly, when we look at 18 to 24-year-olds specifically, we see that personal relationships are a bigger factor in both their overall quality of life and job satisfaction. So what seems to be happening here is that one side of the coin is truly a reflection of the other. Who we are at work is related to who we are at home and vice versa. What do you think, Chris? Does this mean it's out of our control?
Is it out of our control? No. What a provocative question. And you know, I like you, I've struggled with that notion of work-life balance. And years ago, I was exposed to the term work-life integration, which was the idea that you would, you know, kind of go back and forth between work and personal tasks throughout the day. And then more recently, I've heard work-life blending, where the two, it's hard to kind of see the lines, the dividing lines between that. One of our attendees put in the Q&A box that they see it as work-life challenge and that it's rarely a balance. So we're all struggling with this notion. But what I find particularly compelling about the data on the slide is this quality of life notion. And I think that's the future of work-life balance. It's not as simple as that scale that you visualize, Christine. It's really about all us as total beings and what's contributing to a high quality of life or a high standard of living. And you know, the whole notion of work-life balance has really been, it's been elusive, I think, for most people. I think it's been that just beyond our fingertip reach over the years. when it comes to relationships at work, it's not surprising. And as HR professional, we hear through data, we see through data, oh, employees quit managers, they don't quit jobs and they don't quit companies. So what is that they're really quitting? They're quitting a bad relationship. So this idea that those personal relationships in the workplace are contributing to a high quality of life is not a new notion, but I love how the data is confirming that and highlighting that as a key driver for employees moving forward. So what do we do with this data now? How do we take that back into our organizations? Well, I'm going to focus on the relationship piece that contribute to overall quality of life in a remote and hybrid workplace, which many of us are shifting to, at least to some degree. Nurturing meaningful relationships at work is going to be particularly challenging because we need to do it through technology rather than those kind of ad hoc and organic conversations. So as an HR professional, a few things we can do. First of all, we can equip and train our managers to level up the cadence and tone of team meetings. We need to allow space in our team meetings for human to human connection. It can't just be transactional about work related topics. And in particular, in remote first and hybrid workplaces, it's really important that our managers or whoever's leading a meeting allows the space for those human to human connections to happen and those relationships to be nurtured. We can also look at our systems and our processes in our organization for opportunities to enable human connections. There's new technology that's coming out that help facilitate camaraderie and that sense of community within our organizations. And again, it's going to be so critical moving forward, not only for in-person environments, but in our hybrid workplaces as well. And then the final thing is upskilling our managers and leaders on human-centric skills and soft skills, such as leading with compassion and empathetic leadership. We're hearing more and more about these critical leadership skills as we emerge from the pandemic. And really, our leaders need to be more capable and confident operating from these places of compassion and empathy when they're dealing with their teams, promoting psychologically safe workplaces for workers. Really, what we're talking about is breaking the mold of conventional work-life balance and understanding how our employees are now redefining it as a total quality of life standard for themselves. Those are my
Absolutely.
thoughts.
Absolutely. So now we'll move on to assumption 2, and that's that young workers just don't want to work. Now, okay, I'll be honest, it's a little sensational. I know that's not what a lot of us actually believe. But what we are struggling to understand is what motivates younger workers on the job. Unlike their older counterparts, more than half of those ages 18 to 34 told us that they're likely to look for a new work opportunity in the next 2 years. And this was, interestingly, regardless of their quality of life. Whereas with older age groups, their likelihood to look for a new job increases when they report a lower quality of life. For the younger ones, it didn't have as much of an impact. So, what is it that has them looking elsewhere? Even though younger workers are making less, better pay is not their biggest reason for wanting a job change in the next 2 years, as was the case for those who were 35 and up. Those 18 to 34 wanted opportunities to work in their field of study. They expressed wanting opportunities for growth and career advancement. But here's the challenge. They are also struggling to articulate exactly what it is they want. 18 to 34-year-olds are significantly more likely to say that success in their career is important to them, and they're more likely to describe themselves as ambitious. But they're far less likely to report having a sense of purpose and meaning in life. Nearly half say they don't know what they want out of life yet. So, in a nutshell, the younger generation, and this is kind of, we're grouping them as a whole, and later we'll talk a little bit more about the different types, but we're largely seeing that they're struggling to figure out what success looks like for them. They know it's something they like, but they just don't know how to define it or how to achieve it. They just know that it doesn't feel like it's their current role, their current job. So how can employers support employees who don't know what they want yet? Are there ways that employers can help improve a sense of meaning for young workers on the job? What do you think, Chris?
Yeah, for sure. I think, this is really interesting. And as an HR executive and a business leader, this notion of the younger generation is lazy or they don't want to work or what it is an assumption that I've come up against a lot throughout my career. And in businesses and as HR leaders, we need to examine the different kind of generalizations that come with various generations. So when we look to kind of older generations, maybe, my parents, for example, they tended to be very loyal to a company. Both of my parents retired from their organizations after 30 plus years of service. Like they essentially worked there their entire working lives. Motivation for an older generation was more about stability and security, and predictability, I guess, in terms of how they can take care of themselves, take care of the people that they care about. What we're seeing in younger workers and what your data is showing us is they tend to be more inclined to work to live, rather than living to work. And that's to say that their motivations are about experiences. Those experiences for our younger workers can be either in the workplace or they can be outside of the workplace. They don't have it figured out, as you've said, Christine, but I don't think their parents or grandparents necessarily had it figured out either. Just maybe younger workers are more honest about it, that they don't really know yet. So what do we do about it in our businesses? And how do we engage and re-engage our younger workers? Well, if we know that younger workers are going to seek opportunities to learn new skills and broaden their capabilities, we know they're going to want to try new things on and see how they fit. So let's create opportunities for them to do that. Project work is a great way to get a younger worker kind of re-engaged and allow them to upskill or learn new skills on the job. We can create temporary work assignments or secondments if we have large enough organizations, even to other divisions, other functional areas, maybe even other locations. All of these opportunities are going to be appealing to a younger worker. And it's going to come back to us as the organization, as the business, in terms of how we're developing and upskilling those employees and keeping them engaged for the future. Another opportunity I think that exists for us with younger workers is revisiting our flexible options. For example, allowing sabbaticals or personal leaves of absence so employees can go out and gain new personal experiences outside of our organizations, things that we can't offer them, like travel or education or other personal interests and pursuits. They can then return after those sabbaticals or after those leaves of absence and re-engage within our business, maybe bring new skills, bring new perspectives and new experiences that increase their value into our organization. So there's a lot of things that we can do creatively to re-engage, or to advance engagement of a younger workforce. And again, it's the same with the work-life balance. We need to break this mold of trying to fix new challenges with conventional ways of thinking. We really need to challenge ourselves to be creative, to think innovatively, to be innovative, and to really start meeting employees where they are rather than expecting them to meet us where we have always been. So it's a bit of a mind shift for us from a business leader and an HR perspective, but it's an important one to re-engage and keep our younger workers engaged.
Mhm. Those are fantastic points. And I think something I'd like to add is that we also want to be careful. I know that we've used the terms growth and advancement, but to Chris's point, it doesn't necessarily mean climbing the ladder. Now, of course, we've got an image right here on the slide that shows climbing the ladder. Um, so that's not doing us any favors. But essentially, what I'd like to say is that I think we need to pay more attention to exactly what people mean when they say they want advancement or they want success. It might not be about a big raise. I mean, we won't turn down a raise. Who are we kidding? But it might not be about the title. It might not be about getting that next position up in the organization. It might just be about the opportunity to expand their skill set, to take on new challenges, try out different roles. to grow in whichever way, shape, or form that looks like. But it depends on the person.
Yeah.
That's the biggest challenge.
Yeah. The people are always challenging. And I know before we move on to the next assumption, I just wanted to, one of our attendees commented about, are we taking lessons, or ought we be taking lessons from the world of IT and technology, who have as an industry have kind of looked at some of these workplace concepts already for many years, and even for younger workers, how they develop and how they grow their careers is not conventional. It's not that upward mobility necessarily. And a lot of it can be lateral kind of moves, as long as they feel like they're learning something and they're advancing their skills and capabilities. So
Mhm.
my final thought
Exactly.
on that one.
Great. Okay, well, assumption 3, and this is probably one that's going to be very interesting for a lot of you, and that's that the traditional work model is outdated. So working from home numbers, they continue to stay high. And as we are, opening back up again, employers are increasingly adopting a hybrid approach, and some of them are moving to remote work entirely. But when we talk about work location, we also have to look at the mental health aspect of it. So we asked about mental health, and we looked at those who at their work location during the pandemic, but also just preferred work location, just in the future general preferences. And while there were virtually no differences in quality of life and mental health between those who worked remotely during the pandemic and those who worked in person, there is a significant difference in satisfaction with mental health when we look at work location preferences. And that's regardless of what their employer currently allows or can accommodate. Among those who prefer to work remotely, 55% report being satisfied with their mental health, which was significantly lower than 63% of those who prefer to work in person. And this difference, like I said, it didn't exist when we looked at actual work location, but when looking at preferred work location. And then furthermore, the only aspect in which those who work remotely had a distinct advantage was in terms of personal finances. And this is likely because A, they're in higher paying jobs that can allow them to work from home, and B, they're saving some money by spending less on their commute, coffees, lunches, and so on. Now, no one's saying that saving money isn't a good thing. We're not saying that, that's something we just want to take off the table, but it's clear that choosing to work from home is correlated with poorer mental health, and we can't really put a price on that. So when 18% of respondents told us that mental health was a challenge for them during the pandemic, we can't we can't just ignore that. We know that there's something going on. And we're seeing that those who would choose to work remotely, if given the choice, are struggling with their mental health. We have to ask ourselves, what are the risks that we face with the hybrid or remote work model? And then it's a little bit of a chicken or the egg scenario. So, keeping in mind that signs of depression include self isolation, we have to wonder, are people choosing to work remotely because they're depressed and they're struggling with their mental health? Or are they getting depressed because of the isolation that comes with working from home, even if they're choosing to do so for practical reasons or because they think it makes them happier? Ultimately, what I think is that it's important for employers to have frequent and open lines of communication with their remote workers. Those who choose to work from home are struggling, and their their productivity is impacted more. We have this in the data. And again, it's not to say that employers shouldn't allow the option to work from home where it makes sense, but rather just that employers need to ensure that remote workers are adequately supported so they're not at a distinct disadvantage when it comes to their health and productivity. And of course, it's more challenging because those of us who choose to work from home, we have different reasons for doing so. So for some people, the mental health is a risk factor, but for others, it might not be. And that's why these blanket solutions, they we miss a little bit of that nuance, I think. Now, again, I want to make the disclaimer, the data is not suggesting that working from home is bad, should be avoided. I myself prefer to work from home. So the last thing I want to do is tell everyone we want to come back to the office. But I want us to just admit that the blanket approach isn't working and stop just hoping for the best and just start having more of those conversations so we can understand who our employees are on a personal level and what is driving them and what's troubling them and how this all comes together into who they are on the job, at home, in life. Chris, thoughts?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so many. It's such a compelling kind of data point that your research has shown here, and I think really a kind of an insightful one for me. I think when you initially shared this with me, Christine, when preparing for our today's webcast, I was like, really, I had never thought of it that way. And I think this is a really provocative way to look at the remote work or hybrid work concept for the future. So I don't have a lot to add here. I'm not a mental health professional. And like you said in your disclaimer, we're not suggesting that, we move from one blanket assumption to another because of this data. But what I can say is that in our post-pandemic world, there's a lot of talk about how great remote and hybrid work is and will be for the future. But this is I think limiting our perspective as business leaders and when we make these decisions for our workplaces in the future. I mean, there are a lot of good things about being remote. Like you, Christine, I enjoy, for my personal circumstance, the flexibility of working remote. But there's a lot of really good things about being in person too, some of which I do miss. But right now, I prioritize remote work. And I think what it really comes down to is choice, flexibility, and like you said, support for our employees. We can look for ways to empower our employees to help them make the best choices for their personal circumstance. We can offer greater flexibility, not only in terms of where they work, but when they work. We can't ignore the importance of supporting our employees. We can't ignore the importance of mental health supports and mental wellness in our employees. But regardless of whether they're remote or in person, it goes back to leading with empathy, building relationships with our employees, and watching for signs that employees may be struggling. So, we're at assumption 3 coming out of your research, and we're starting already to circle back to some of the themes that we've already been talking about: quality of life, leadership skills, building relationships. And we really need to recognize that every employee is different. And, we can, in our businesses, we can create policy and we can create kind of rules or guidelines or rules of thumb, I guess. But it's not a one size fits all type of approach. And, in my notes, and I want to say this because I want to challenge our business leaders to get away from the notion of best practice, particularly on this issue, because we cling to best practice. Well, it's best practice to do this or best practice to do that. The best practice in our organizations is the one that is best for our own unique businesses. There are times and places where remote work can be optimal, and there are times and places where being in person is the best option. And our challenge as business leaders is to crack that code for the organizations where we are today. And this is going to look different for every organization, and it probably will look different for every employee as much as we can that works within our organization. So I said I didn't have a lot to add, and here I am going on and on, but it just is so compelling. This one is really, really hits home for me. So this will be an area that I take away from your research and from your data for sure. So thanks.
Okay, finally, we're going to look at assumption 4, that the Great Resignation is about employee dissatisfaction. So I'll tell you, mostly employees, they're doing okay. 74% are happy at work. 73% feel they have a good relationship with their managers. 70% They feel respected, supported by their team, and most feel they have the tools and technology they need to do their jobs well. And if you look at our report, you'll actually see a lot more of the job satisfaction in detail. These are the factors we're focusing on for right now. But something that I want to bring us back to, though, is that, of course, and this is why we're here, turnover has been high lately. So we had 28% who reported voluntarily leaving their job in the past 2 years. And even worse, 43% say they're likely to look for a new opportunity in the next 2 years. So if more than 7 out of 10 are happy at their jobs, why are more than 4 out of 10 looking for new opportunities? At first glance, we ask them why, and it looks like better pay is the biggest reason. But when you see responses like they wanted a different career, they wanted to advance in their career, wanted to work in their field of study, you end up with a significantly higher proportion who essentially cited career growth and relevance as the main reason for making a change or for wanting to make a change. It accounts for 22% of the primary reasons people left their jobs and 29% of the reasons people are more likely to look for a new job. And that far exceeds pay. And then if we return to the different aspects related to job satisfaction, well, younger workers in particular, they're more dissatisfied with their opportunities for growth and advancement. So my take here is that employers aren't necessarily missing the mark. They're just perhaps missing the bigger picture and only talking to employees about the here and now when employees are thinking, especially our younger ones, are thinking about what's next. They just like to know that there's a path for them, that there's development for them, that there's opportunities. And I think a lot of the times they exist, they're out there. But if it's not necessarily being communicated to them very clearly, or if they fail to see that, then we've lost them right there. That's what I think.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is really, again, interesting when we start linking it back, right, to quality of life and understanding that there's a lot that goes into that concept of quality of life. And of course, financial stability is a big part of that. So of course, compensation and pay will always be part of employee decisions about do they stay, do they go, when's the right time to make those changes. But again, it's this notion that money isn't everything, and we've known that for a long time, especially in the HR field. Money isn't everything. We can start layering on now some of the other assumptions and some of your other data and research when we look at this idea of the great resignation. So we already know that younger workers want to learn new skills and gain new experiences. So it really shouldn't be surprising to see the data on this slide that confirms that career growth and meaningful and relevant work is going to be important to our employees. So at the organizational level, we can start to reevaluate how our businesses are designed. How are we set up today? Why are we set up this way? Has it changed during the pandemic? Or more importantly, does it need to change moving into the future? And when we design our organizations, of course, we need to design our systems and our processes to support our strategic initiatives and our business objectives. But as an HR leader and as a people leader, I would include the people component as well. Our systems and processes must also enable talent and skill delivery and development. And they need to unlock the human potential that exists in our businesses. And we can't ignore that when we're designing or redesigning our organizations. Um, I know these can be very macro ideas, redesigning an organization. And I do recognize that it's not possible for a lot of us that are here today. So what I would say is start small. Small incremental changes over time will add up to big improvements. So start with a team. Start with a department, a small department. Focus on an area that may be already experiencing higher attrition or maybe comprised of real strategically critical skills that where the risks are a little bit greater. work with that team, work with that department, and make small changes, try new approaches, redesign things, start layering in more skills development intentionally into that team structure, and measure those results. But really, whatever you decide to do in your own organizations, we need to be transparent with our employees about the growth opportunities that are available to them, and whether we can redesign or not, how our organizations are structured. We need to show employees that they can build and develop their careers in our organizations. And it might not be in the conventional way, the moving up the ladder sort of way. There might be other ways that it's going to happen. But
Mhm.
yeah, that's critical.
Absolutely. Okay, what we'll do here is just very quickly recap what we know, and then we're going to move into the personas. So actually, what we're going to do is recap this and then just talk a little bit about what human reality means with all this in mind, and then the personas. So one, negative health events at work, like burnout, they're impacting our quality of life, which is strongly linked to looking for new opportunities. Two, remote workers who are struggling with their mental health, they're in a worse position than their in-person counterparts. Three, young workers are feeling a little bit disappointed with their jobs in terms of career growth and advancement and relevance to their background, field of study, and interests, but having a successful career is important to them. Number four, across all ages, job changes are more often driven by career development than pay or other benefits. So again, this now brings us to what we're calling the human reality approach, which comes down to four main things. The first is redefining engagement. To better understand what makes employees tick, we need to look past standard employee engagement measures. By considering how work contributes to overall quality of life and likelihood to look for new opportunities, employers will be able to better predict who's at risk when we talk about employee retention and turnover. And number two is a working hybrid model to maximize the effectiveness of the hybrid or the remote work model. Employers should be paying particular attention to the needs of those who prefer alternative or non-traditional work arrangements, because those who are already struggling face more risks to productivity and just to their health in general than in-person workers. Employers will need to make sure to support them so that it doesn't exacerbate any existing mental health and productivity challenges. Number three is that relevance leads to retention. Younger employees are looking for guidance. It's easy to think that the grass is greener rather than admitting that you'll likely be unhappy wherever you go until you figure out what it is you really want and can map out the way to get there. So the truth is, for those who are newer to the workforce, at least my belief is that dedicating time and attention to helping them identify a career path will likely pay off for you in terms of increased retention and engagement. And then finally, number four is just taking the holistic perspective, which shouldn't come as a surprise by this point. Employee engagement isn't just about a job satisfaction score or all those metrics in your standard employee engagement surveys. You've got your 5-point agreements, and of course we do this ourselves too, but it's about looking beyond that. Happy employees make happy people in life, and when you're happy at home, you're also happy on the job. So by rethinking how the holistic approach and work and life come together, we can create a more integrated self, ideally, that can just thrive in all aspects of life. So now in part three, we're going to take a look at the personas, and I did promise some time at the end for questions, so we'll just very quickly go through these, but I promise you there are far more details available in the full report. So the personas, these were developed based on a segmentation analysis, and it's based on personality and life goals. And the 5 personas I'm going to present to you, I want to emphasize that this is based on Canadians as a whole, range of industries, professions, levels of experience on the job. So they're very broad. But that said, I think it's a great starting point for just rethinking how we look at who we are when we bring ourselves to work. So the first one, this one is what we're calling the provider. So it's someone who's stable but stressed. They represent about 16% of the workforce, and their turnover risk is the lowest. So 31% were likely to start looking for a new opportunity. Now, why is this? Because they're accountable to their families. They're providers. They work because they have to. And this was something that they explicitly told us. They tend to skew female, middle-aged, and they have an overall average quality of life, except for their personal finances. So their job satisfaction, it's kind of on par, but their likelihood to go anywhere, it's quite low. And I think the reason for that is because they feel like they can't afford to that instability that might come with leaving their job if they're dissatisfied. But there are risks for employers. They might be loyal, but if they get another opportunity that comes their way that promises better pay or perhaps makes them feel like it can better attend to their needs, that's where we risk losing this personality. So that's the provider. Next is the lone wolf. This is someone who's self-reliant and satisfied. They're about 18% of the workforce, and their turnover risk is also quite low, 32%. But when it comes to job satisfaction, you can see it's quite a bit higher. They tend to be introverted. They're dedicated to their work. They tend to enjoy their jobs. They take pride in what they do, and they like using their knowledge and experience on the job. But again, there are threats. Because this group tends to be more introverted, return to office mandates, that's a scary thing for them. They don't necessarily want to lose the sense of independence and flexibility and working at their own pace that they've achieved while working from home. So this is the type where they're actually quite content. But if you start changing too much, you might lose them that way. Next, we have the go-getter. This is a great segment. And the great news is that this is a good chunk of the workforce, 41%. Turnover risk is low, 33%. They tend to be older, higher quality of life. They value family and friends. They're very community focused, and personality-wise, they tend to be a little bit more extroverted. They're very happy with their jobs. They've spent a lot of time working to get where they are. They feel recognized. They feel valued. But as things change in a post-pandemic world, and because again, they're more extroverted, they might miss the in-office environment more than say the lone wolf does. That might make them feel less engaged at work. And another threat, those of them who were considering or thinking about new opportunities in the future, they were the most likely to say that they would do that to become self-employed. So it's not that they're necessarily looking for something bigger and better, but it's maybe a little bit more of, if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, self-actualization. And if they feel like they're no longer pursuing their passions or leading in the way they'd like to with an employer, then they have that experience, they have that ambition, they've got that go-getter attitude to think about giving it a go on their own. And that's the risk with this group. And now finally, we're going to move into the two segments that are a little bit more troublesome and are probably the ones that you're most worried about. And to be honest, you should be. So we've got here the wanderer. They tend to be unhappy, they're insecure. They're 15% of the workforce, 45% of them are likely to look for new opportunities. They tend to be younger, they tend to be male, but that's not to say that's everyone, but they are overall just dissatisfied with their quality of life and all aspects of it. And unfortunately, or I don't know to say it's unfortunately, but they have other values in life and they don't care about financial success. This poses a really big challenge. I think this one is to be honest, is the hardest to figure out because they have they lack a sense of purpose and meaning in life. They have high job instability. They do prefer to work from home. So, and I think because we see that their quality of life and their mental health is lower, that we know that there's a risk there. So what on earth can we do to help them? My takeaways are that because they're just feeling lost in life, we want to just help them do what we can to map out the path for them. Who am I? What do I value? And how can I live these values on the job? How can I take the next step in my career? Or what is that next step that gives me meaning? And of course, this is far easier said than done. We can't help people solve their lives, but this is the truth. And this segment, they're very unhappy. And the grass is greener is probably a perfect description, because until they know what they're looking for, they will just keep job hopping until they probably stumble upon it as a fluke, to be honest, unless we can change how we support them. And then finally, we have the dreamer. This is who we call someone who's stable but stressed. 9% of the workforce, and they've got the highest turnover risk, 51%. Their job satisfaction is kind of on par, but their overall quality of life is a little bit lower, and they're struggling to take care of themselves. They call themselves ambitious. They say that they're career minded. And so unlike the wanderer, they do say they want success. They're ambitious. They want a successful career, but again, they don't know what that looks like for them. So we can see here that, both the dreamer and the wanderer, they're both younger, and they're both struggling with meaning and purpose. One of them, I think, is a little bit easier because they say they're ambitious and they want success. So it's just helping them get there. But then for the other one, again, it's how do we help them figure even out what that means? Because if we don't even know what that means, we can't figure out how to help them get there. So these were the 5 personas, and again, they're quite broad. I think if we zeroed in on specific industries or professions, we'd probably end up with slightly different ones. But perhaps you recognize yourself in one of them. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I definitely recognize myself in one of them for sure. And I have to admit, I like these personas a lot, and I like them a lot better than the traditional generational assumptions that we've made, based on the year range of when a person was born. I like these personas. They really resonate. And I think what really jumps out at me from this is that our employees are not cookie cutter. Even those who are in the same generation can fall into different persona profiles as you've presented them and as the data in your survey has told us. So from an organizational perspective, there's no one size fits all in our organizations. And, in spite of our best efforts, there are always going to be employees who opt out of what we have to offer them. And you know what? That's okay. There's not an organization or a business that exists in the world, none that I am aware of anyway, that has 0% attrition year over year. I mean, people will change jobs, they will change organizations. So, you know, I recognize myself in one of these. So there's one in particular that I really recognize myself in. And I'm sure that many who are attending here today recognize themselves in these personas, and maybe even more so than in their kind of generational assumptions based on when they were born. So what do we do about this again as business leaders? Well, I think, from an HR perspective, I look at where are the most critical skills and talent in my organization. And then I think these personas, to layer these personas on top of those critical and skills in my organizational kind of structure and design, and understand who are the humans, who are the actual humans that work here. What is this data telling us? And I know this is based on kind of broad assumptions. Like you said, Christine, there may be variables on these personas based on different industries. But isn't that up to us then to look inside of our own organizations and start dissecting the data and looking at the data in a meaningful way for us to make really smart decisions about our talent programs moving forward? So there's a lot we can do with these personas. And throughout the presentation, there have been questions about demographical differences and industry differences and around some of the assumptions that we talked about earlier. Well, I think the personas answer a lot of those questions from the audience today, because now we're layering on the human aspect into some of those assumptions or busted assumptions that you discussed earlier.
Mhm. So ultimately, what do we recommend for employers? And a lot of you, and I'm not going to lie, it's not easy. There's a lot here to think about, and it's not that blanket approach. It's not cheap. It's not quick and easy. It's always going to be a challenge. But what I would suggest, find out who your employees are on that personal level. Know that they're not all the same. And then, of course, learn the signs of burnout and mental distress and check in with your employees. But it has to be genuine because they can tell when it's not truly there. And when they feel supported and like truly supported and feel understood on a personal level, that resonates on the job. Now, before we very quickly hop onto a few questions, I just like to say thank you to everyone who joined us today. You will receive an email shortly after with a link to access the free report. And I promise there's a lot more details in the report, especially related to the personas. And if the insights have made you think a little bit differently or start to wonder about how you can do better, or just, if you want to zero in on a specific industry or maybe for your organization, please feel free to contact us to conduct a custom research study. And the email, it will come to you in the link. It's also solutions@leger360.com. So with that, let's take a few
Yeah,
questions.
for sure. I've got a couple kind of at the ready, and there have been quite a few questions coming in. I apologize, we're not going to be able to get to all of them, but I think we've touched on many of them just through the presentation itself. But Christine, there were a couple questions around the mental health and remote worker and some of those correlations that you saw in the data that you collected. And so a couple of questions asking, does the data on mental health issues intersect with other demographic data such as race, gender identity, abilities, disabilities? And kind of a second related question is, did you see any difference in trends based on industry when you were looking at remote work and mental health data?
Mhm. There were some differences. I have to say that because we went quite broad, that we had so many different cuts of the data we could look at, that it was hard to pluck out anything that really meaningfully made sense. But one thing that did stand out to me that we didn't include in today's presentation was that when it comes to the mental health aspect, those who identify as visible minorities, they're struggling a lot more. And they are facing more challenges on the job. They told us that. There are other demographic variables as well that were captured in the survey, but that we didn't necessarily take that closer look at because we were a little bit more focused on the persona side of it. But if you have any more questions about that, please feel free to contact us, and we'd be happy to talk more.
That's great. Thank you. And speaking of the personas, a couple of questions as well coming in on the personas. So did you see any differences or variables in the personas based on regional location? Again, it might be kind of slicing and dicing the data in a way that you didn't really get into, but so wondering if there's any regional differences on the personas. And maybe a second related question is, did you see any trends that run across multiple personas as well?
hmm So when it comes to regional differences, there weren't many. I will say that Ontario had a little bit higher of a proportion of the go-getter segment, the ones who are doing quite well, and they're performing really strong. Alberta is struggling a little bit more, and I think that these differences. I think there's other factors at play. There's when we talk about the economy or the job or even political environment, there's a lot there that I'll be honest, I don't really want to go into that Pandora's box. But one thing that stood out to me that I thought was really interesting was that the working from home, outside of the mental health playing a little bit of that role in preferring to work from home or out, we didn't actually see much of a difference in the segments for whether they prefer to be remote workers or in-person workers. So each segment, with the exception of the wanderer who tends to, and the lone wolf, but they tend to be fairly even splits. You have go-getters who enjoy working from home. You have go-getters who enjoy being in the office, and it's because there's so many aspects to our personalities, to who we are, that it's honestly so difficult to say.
So interesting. So interesting. I want to be mindful of the time. I'm looking at the clock
Mhm.
there, and hopefully for our audience, we at least answered most of their questions that came in kind of throughout the webcast and also toward the end there. So I think that's probably all we have time for. But you tell me, Christine, it's really up to you in the Leger team. But I know that a lot of our people are kind of in the middle of their workday as well. So
Mhm.
I want to be sensitive to that. So maybe I'll just pass it back.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we do. We really appreciate you joining us today. I would love to, to talk more about this. Please feel free to contact us again, even if it's just for questions. If you're interested in doing a study, we're here to have a conversation with you. And yeah, like I said, after this, you'll get the free report. There are a lot more details in the report, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.